The first thing I noticed wasn't the paint fumes. It was the silence. My house, my refuge after 6 months of hospice visits, cold motel coffee, and holding my mother's hand as her pulse faded, should have felt familiar when I walked in. But instead, it smelled like someone else had been living there. Then I saw them. 3 neon yellow envelopes plastered across my doorframe like warning signs on a condemned building, and one fat certified letter shoved so deep in the mailbox it had to be ripped free. Final notice. Foreclosure proceedings imminent. I stood there on the porch, still wearing my black funeral dress, clutching a purse full of tissues, trying to understand how an $85 a month HOA could claim I owed nearly $5,000 in violations. The numbers didn't make sense. The timing was cruel, and the handwriting on the signature line, Brenda Kirkpatrick, President, was so perfectly looped it made my teeth hurt. Inside, the air was stale, as if the walls had been holding their breath while I was gone. Wilted lilies slumped in a vase on the kitchen counter. Sympathy cards lay unopened in a pile. My phone buzzed with another voicemail from Brenda, her third this week, each one colder than the last. Violations don't pause for personal tragedy, Mrs. Hawthorne. Pay within 10 days, or we'll protect our community's property values by any means necessary. Property values. That's what my grief was worth to her. Exactly $4,800. I sank into a chair and read the itemized list. Grass too long, mailbox wrong color, unauthorized landscaping changes. Lies stacked like bricks. The grass was cut weekly by an HOA-approved service. The mailbox matched 47 others on the street. And the unauthorized modification, removing a dead rose bush, with written approval I'd saved on my phone. My fingers shook, not from fear but fury. I'd spent 18 years on the federal bench listening to criminals justify their greed. I knew that voice Brenda used on the phone. The fake sweetness lacquered over contempt. I'd heard it from gang leaders, corporate swindlers, even dirty cops. She thought I was just another widow, too tired to fight. I wasn't tired. I was angry. From the window, I spotted Brenda's pearl-white Lexus idling at the corner. She didn't even bother to hide it. She wanted me to see her watching. And behind her steering wheel, she gave me that perfect suburban smile, the kind that doesn't touch the eyes. Across the street, Florence Murphy, 82, frail as the wind, clutching her violation notice, peeked through her curtains. A warning, or maybe a plea. I'd seen that look in courtrooms before. The look of someone being squeezed dry by people who bet she wouldn't fight back. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the dining table with a legal pad, drawing lines between names, dates, and addresses. 3 houses had already sold this year under distress, all to the same shell company, all $40,000 below market value. And at the center of every line, like a spider on a web, sat Brenda Kirkpatrick. By dawn, the anger had settled into something colder, heavier, a kind of resolve I hadn't felt since handing down my first federal sentence. If Brenda thought she could strip me of my home while I buried my mother, she'd made the gravest mistake of her life. Because I wasn't just Patricia Hawthorne, quiet neighbor in a modest ranch house. I was Judge Hawthorne, and I was about to put her entire empire on trial. But first, I had to let her believe she was winning. By Monday, the harassment stopped pretending to be polite. At exactly 6 a.m., a Lexus SUV rolled up my driveway, like it owned the asphalt. I didn't have to look to know who it was. Brenda Kirkpatrick doesn't knock. She inspects. I stayed by the kitchen window, coffee in hand, watching her conduct a wellness check on my property. Clipboard tucked under one arm, designer sunglasses at dawn. She walked the perimeter like a prison guard. Beside her, a tall kid, maybe 19, wielded a tape measure and camera, snapping photos of my mailbox, driveway, even my garden gnome. If it hadn't been designed to break me, it would have been comical. But intimidation disguised as procedure is still intimidation. I could almost hear my mother's voice in the back of my mind. Don't let anyone scare you in your own home, Trish. I set my coffee down, opened the front door, and just stood there on the porch in silence. Not angry. Not smiling, just watching. Brenda froze for a fraction of a second before plastering on her perfected suburban grin. "Good morning, Mrs. Hawthorne," she sang out. Routine inspection. You understand how important it is to keep our community beautiful. The boy avoided eye contact. She gave him a sharp look, and he went back to snapping pictures. I said nothing. Silence makes liars nervous. By Thursday, my mailbox key didn't work. Security upgrades, Brenda claimed in an email. Friday, my pool pass was deactivated. Technical glitch. Saturday, my lawn service abruptly canceled, citing liability concerns. Every HOA-controlled service I paid for vanished overnight. It was obvious now. They weren't just trying to find me. They were trying to isolate me. That evening, I walked the neighborhood at dusk, notepad in hand, pretending to admire the spring flowers. But I wasn't looking at the landscaping. I was looking at the people behind the windows. 3 doors down, I saw Florence Murphy staring at a violation letter with tears streaking her cheeks. Across the street, Tom Bradley, a retired Marine, was repainting his mailbox the same regulation green I'd been cited for. A moving truck sat outside the Johnsons' house, boxes piled high on the lawn. Another forced sale. Another coincidence. I circled addresses on my pad. Families in crisis. Houses undervalued. Each one connected to Brenda's smiling harassment. By the time I got home, I'd mapped 6 cases. A pattern was emerging, but I needed proof. The next morning, I drove to the county courthouse. The records office smelled like dust and old paper, but public filings never lie. In 4 hours, I found 23 property transfers tied to a single buyer, KCS Holdings. A quick search showed the company traced directly to Kirkpatrick Construction, Brenda's husband's business. Average loss per homeowner? $47,000. Total theft disguised as enforcement? Over $2 million. The scale of it made me pause. This wasn't some petty neighborhood shakedown. It was organized theft, targeting people when they were grieving, divorcing, or financially drowning. I'd sentenced drug traffickers with more honor than this. On my way out of the courthouse, I overheard a voice in the stairwell. Sharp, impatient. Brenda, accelerate the timeline on Hawthorne. File the foreclosure tomorrow. My buyer's financing won't wait another month. My hands clench around my phone as I hit record, heart pounding with equal parts anger and adrenaline. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I knew 2 things for certain. Brenda Kirkpatrick wasn't just corrupt, she was desperate. I couldn't take her down alone. That night, I called Tom Bradley. Ever get the feeling this neighborhood's under siege? I asked. The old Marine didn't hesitate. Ma'am, I've been tracking her scams for months. Got a list of families she's pushed out. Thought you should see it. We met at his kitchen table under a single yellow light, trading notes like soldiers planning a counterattack. His list matched mine. Names, dates, violation letters, below-market sales, all pointing to the same spider at the center of the web. Brenda thinks you're alone, Tom said, passing me the papers. She's wrong. For the first time since coming home from Mom's funeral, I felt something other than grief or rage. I felt momentum. Tomorrow, I'd start building a case. Quietly, methodically. Let Brenda think she was winning, right up until the moment her whole empire collapsed. 3 days into my quiet investigation, Brenda made her move. I woke at dawn to find troublemaker spray painted across my mailbox in dripping red letters. The kind of paint that bleeds into metal no matter how hard you scrub. My first instinct was to laugh. It felt childish, beneath even Brenda's usual brand of arrogance. But when I turned to head inside, I saw Florence Murphy standing on her porch in her robe, eyes wide and frightened, holding a similar letter she'd just received. Her trembling hand lifted in a silent warning. This wasn't a prank. It was a message. By nightfall, the harassment had escalated. For Slash Tires, a dead pool of silence when I called the sheriff's office. The deputy who answered my call shared Brenda's last name. Of course he did. But what broke through my judicial calm wasn't the vandalism. It was the phone call Margaret Morgan received at 11 p.m., the neighbor with the toddler and a yard full of excessive toys. Patricia, she whispered, voice shaking, I recorded this. She held up her phone, and Brenda's voice spilled into my kitchen like poison. Margaret, you seem like a smart woman with kids to protect. Maybe stop supporting Patricia's troublemaking. Accidents happen. Little ones play outside. Be ashamed if something happened. Threatening a child. My blood went cold. 18 years on the federal bench had hardened me to every kind of cruelty, but this was different. This wasn't theoretical crime on paper. This was a neighbor using fear like a weapon. For the first time, I felt something new: doubt. What if I pushed too hard? What if Brenda lashed out at Florence or Margaret before I could stop her? I wasn't just fighting to save my own home anymore. I was holding the safety of innocent people in my hands. I closed my eyes and heard Mom's voice again. Stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. The next morning, Tom Bradley showed up with black coffee strong enough to wake the dead and a manila folder full of property records. "She's bleeding money," he said flatly. "Kirkpatrick Construction's on the edge of bankruptcy. Your house isn't just a target, it's her lifeline." Financial desperation. That explained the sloppy intimidation, the vandalism, the threats. Brenda wasn't just greedy. She was cornered, and cornered people are dangerous. That afternoon, I met Margaret and Tom in my dining room, which now looked like a crime lab. Maps of the neighborhood papered the walls, red pins marking every for sale. Financial records stacked high beside my legal pads. "Patricia," Margaret said softly, bouncing her toddler on her hip, "what if she goes after someone before you finish building this case?" That was the turning point. Until then, I planned to move slow, gather airtight evidence, document every violation, file a petition to dissolve the board. But Brenda's threat to a child lit a fire I couldn't put out. I made a decision in that moment that would change everything. I wasn't going to wait. The next day, I scheduled a meeting with Daniel Rodriguez, a homeowner's rights attorney already tracking similar scams in 3 counties. He spread photos and letters across his desk like an FBI crime scene. "You're not her first victim," he said grimly, "but you could be her last." Then he asked the question no one else had. "Mrs. Hawthorne, what exactly do you do for a living?" I'd kept that secret buried for months, wanting to fight as a regular citizen. But seeing 23 families' lives dismantled on paper made the choice for me. I leaned forward, voice steady. "I'm not just Patricia Hawthorne. I'm Judge Hawthorne, United States District Court, 18 years on the federal bench." Rodriguez's pen froze mid-note. You're a federal judge. And Brenda Kirkpatrick," I said, letting the words cut like steel, "has been systematically violating federal fraud and racketeering laws. This isn't just an HOA dispute anymore. It's a federal case." In that instant, the whole fight shifted. This wasn't about stopping a foreclosure letter. It was about dismantling a criminal empire, and Brenda had no idea the woman she was hunting had just declared war. Brenda didn't back down. She doubled down. 3 days after I told Daniel Rodriguez who I really was, a certified letter arrived on heavy cardstock, the kind meant to feel official. $7,000 due immediately. 5 days to pay or foreclosure begins. The violations were the same lies, padded with administrative costs and legal fees. But what made my stomach turn wasn't the number. It was the accusation buried in fine print. Failure to attend mandatory mediation sessions constitutes waiver of appeal rights. There had never been any mediation sessions. They'd simply fabricated them. I stared at the paper in silence, letting the anger settle into something sharper, like glass ground into steel. Brenda wasn't just corrupt, she was sloppy. And sloppy criminals always trip over their own lies. But anger wasn't enough. Not when Florence Murphy found threatening notes in her mailbox. Not when Margaret's toddler woke crying at midnight after someone pounded on their door. Not when Tom Bradley spotted Brenda's nephew taking photos of my car at 2 a.m. I was no longer just fighting for my home. I was fighting for every neighbor living under Brenda's thumb. And the weight of that responsibility pressed hard on my chest in the dark hours of the night. Rodriguez built our case like a fortress. Violation patterns, forged documents, false inspections, and city permit records proving Brenda's motive. She needed my corner lot to complete a land assembly for a $300,000 duplex project. But every step forward brought new danger. Friday morning, I found troublemakers scrawled again, this time across Margaret's driveway. Saturday night, all 4 of Tom's tires were slashed. Sunday, Florence called me in tears after a sheriff's deputy, Brenda's cousin, warned her to stay out of Patricia's mess. It felt like the walls of the neighborhood were closing in. I'd faced cartel leaders and organized crime rings in federal courtrooms, but never from my own driveway, and never with my neighbor's children in the crossfire. For the first time, I caught myself wondering, am I putting them in danger by fighting back? Monday evening, we met my dining table, now a full-blown war room. Maps paper the walls, red pins marking every victimized family. Evidence binders stacked like jury exhibits. My old gavel sat on the table by habit, a silent reminder of the authority I'd kept hidden for too long. Margaret set down her phone with shaking hands. She called me again, she whispered. Then she hit play. Brenda's voice slithered through the speaker. Margaret, accidents happen. Little kids wander. If Patricia keeps stirring things up, someone's going to get hurt. The words turned the room ice cold. Tom leaned forward, fists clenched. This isn't harassment anymore. This is a threat. We can't wait. He was right. The slow, methodical plan, petitioning homeowners, documenting violations, filing complaints, wasn't fast enough. Brenda was lashing out like an animal trapped in a cage, and I couldn't predict who she'd claw at next. I looked at Florence, who'd been quiet all evening. Her frail hands trembled as she reached into her purse and slid an envelope across the table. I can't do this anymore, she said, eyes glistening. She made me sign fake violation reports, promised me $5,000, threatened to put a lien on my house if I didn't cooperate. Inside the envelope were dozens of forged documents with Florence's shaky signature. It was the smoking gun we'd been missing, proof that Brenda's entire enforcement system was built on fraud. Florence, I said softly, are you willing to testify? Her chin lifted with surprising strength. I'm done being scared. That was the moment the tide turned inside me. No more hesitation. No more fear. I wasn't going to wait for Brenda to make another move. I was going to walk in her next meeting and end her empire in front of the entire neighborhood. I spent that night rehearsing my presentation like a closing argument. No robe, no courtroom. Just a woman with evidence, standing up to tyranny on her own street. Brenda still thought I was a tired widow about to fold. She was about to meet Judge Hawthorne, the woman who'd sent gang leaders, mobsters, and white-collar crooks to prison, and learn exactly what happens when you threaten a federal judge's neighbors. The trap was set, and Brenda didn't even know she was walking straight into it. The community center smelled like burnt coffee and fear. Folding chairs scraped against the floor as nearly 50 neighbors packed the overheated room, buzzing with rumor and anticipation. Brenda Kirkpatrick sat at the head table like a queen guarding her crumbling throne, navy blazer pressed crisp, pearl-white Lexus keys glittering beside her clipboard. Her 19-year-old nephew, Chad, fidgeted beside her, pretending to look official with a stack of fabricated reports. I took a seat in the back row, calm as a judge waiting to deliver sentence. Daniel Rodriguez sat next to me, boxes of evidence stacked at his feet. Tom Bradley stood near the door with a Channel 7 News crew I'd quietly invited. Margaret Morgan had her phone ready, live streaming every second to the neighborhood Facebook group. Brenda banged a gavel she didn't deserve. This emergency meeting addresses one individual's campaign to undermine our community's safety and property values. Officer Kirkpatrick has evidence of harassment, trespassing, and criminal threats. Her cousin, the sheriff's deputy, looked pale as he held up a manila folder thick with lies. Based on these statements and photographs, he muttered, we're prepared to issue citations. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, can she do that? I stayed seated, silent, letting the tension rise. Then Florence Murphy stood up. The room went still as the frail widow hobbled to the microphone, envelope in hand. Her voice trembled, but not with fear. Brenda, she said, I can't lie for you anymore. Brenda's mask cracked. Florence, sit down. You're confused. I'm not confused, Florence said firmly. You made me sign fake violation reports. You promised me money. You threatened my house. I'm done being scared. She opened the envelope and read her handwritten confession, every word a nail in Brenda's coffin. Forged inspections, false fines, witness statements Florence never gave. The deputy's eyes widened. Chad swallowed hard. Whispers turned into murmurs, then angry voices. She lied to us? She's stealing homes. Brenda's voice rose, shrill and panicked. She's senile. She doesn't know what she's saying. That was my cue. I stood and walked to the microphone with deliberate calm. The room fell silent, every eye on me. Mrs. Kirkpatrick, I said, my voice steady, do you deny systematically targeting grieving families with fabricated violations? She sneered. You're the one fabricating, Mrs. Hawthorne. You're a troublemaker trying to avoid paying your fines. I reached into my purse and pulled out my credentials. The seal of the United States District Court gleamed under the fluorescent lights. My name, I said, letting the words carry, is Judge Patricia Hawthorne. And what I've witnessed here tonight constitutes federal fraud, racketeering, and violation of civil rights under color of law. The room went dead quiet. You could hear the hum of the overhead lights. The deputy took 3 slow steps away from Brenda, as if her corruption might be contagious. Brenda's face drained of color. You can't do this. You're supposed to be neutral. This is entrapment. Entrapment? I held up my phone, screen glowing red. I recorded you plotting to fast-track my foreclosure. I recorded your threats against my neighbors. I have financial records proving you funneled $2 million in stolen equity into your family shell companies. And now we have Florence's testimony. Margaret turned her live stream toward me. Tom signaled the Channel 7 crew. Cameras flashed. Officer Kirkpatrick, I said sharply, my judicial authority filling the room. The evidence you're holding is fabricated. If you continue presenting it, you become part of this conspiracy. Step away from the table. Now. The deputy hesitated, then dropped the folder like it was burning his hands. He pulled his radio. Dispatch, I need detectives at the Meadowbrook Community Center. Possible federal crimes in progress. Brenda lunged for the microphone, screaming, she's lying. She's not even a real judge. You're all being tricked. Call them, I said, holding up my badge. Call the FBI right now, or I will. I didn't have to. 17 minutes later, 2 black SUVs pulled up outside. Special Agent Maria Santos stepped into the room, all calm authority and quiet menace. Judge Hawthorne, she said with a nod. We've been monitoring communications. We're ready to proceed with arrests. The room erupted. Neighbors shouted. Some cried. Phones filmed as federal agents cuffed Brenda, Chad, and the crooked lawyer brother-in-law who'd forged the liens. Brenda's eyes locked on me as they led her away, hatred burning hotter than fear. This isn't over, she spat. I met her gaze without blinking. Yes, I said, voice like a gavel striking wood. It is. 6 months later, my garden smells like fresh coffee and honeysuckle. The kind of morning scent you only notice when you're no longer fighting to keep your home. Where Brenda Kirkpatrick once planned to pour concrete and erase our green space, children now chase each other between rows of newly planted roses. A handmade sign swings gently in the breeze. Florence Murphy Memorial Garden. The neighbors insisted on naming it after the woman whose trembling courage turned the tide. Florence cried when we told her. So did I. The legal end came fast and sharp, just like justice should. Brenda pleaded guilty to federal fraud, racketeering, and civil rights violations. 8 years in prison, no parole. Her nephew Chad got 3 for forging inspections he never made. The crooked lawyer brother-in-law was disbarred and sentenced to 5. Federal restitution orders recovered over $2 million for the family she'd robbed. But the numbers tell only part of the story. The real victory is quieter. It's Margaret Morgan, finally able to let her toddler play outside without fear. It's Tom Bradley waving from his porch while organizing a veterans outreach program in our now transparent HOA. It's neighbors who once whispered in fear, now laughing over potluck tables, knowing no clipboard tyrant will ever hold power here again. We rebuilt more than finances. We rebuilt trust. Our HOA board is new, elected by real votes instead of intimidation. Fees dropped from $85 to $35 with complete financial transparency. Every homeowner has access to records, and I serve as an unpaid advisor, not as Judge Hawthorne, but as Patricia, the neighbor with a forest green mailbox who waves from the driveway. The ripple effects spread beyond our street. Local news turned our story into a case study in organized community resistance. State legislators invited me to testify about homeowner protections. Rodriguez expanded his practice, helping families in 3 counties fight back against corrupt boards. The FBI created an HOA fraud task force using our evidence as its blueprint. But the most meaningful legacy is personal. In my mother's final days, she told me, "Stand up for what's right, even when it's hard." That's what we're here for. At the time, I thought she meant the courtroom. Now I know she meant something deeper, standing up for people who have no voice, whether they're neighbors across the street or strangers on the other side of the country. Last week, we planted a bench at the edge of the memorial garden with her name etched into the wood. I sit there some mornings, coffee in hand, watching kids climb the jungle gym Brenda once tried to condemn. The air smells alive again. Sometimes I get emails from strangers who saw the news coverage or the viral video of that meeting. People who whisper their own HOA horror stories and ask how to fight back. My answer is always the same. Document everything. Organize with neighbors. Find the law buried under the lies. And never forget that courage is contagious. Justice doesn't come because you wait for it. It comes because you drag it, kicking and screaming if you must, into the light. The day Brenda was led out of our community center in handcuffs, I didn't feel triumph. I felt relief. Relief that no one else on our street would wake to foreclosure letters while mourning a parent. Relief that a neighbor's child wouldn't grow up in fear. Relief that the strong-armed silence of one corrupt woman had been shattered by the voices of many ordinary people who refused to stay quiet. Now, when I walk past my mailbox, the same forest green box Brenda claimed was illegal. I run my hand along its smooth metal and smile. It's no longer a symbol of harassment. It's a marker of defiance. The last thing my mother ever told me was to do the right thing, even when it costs you. Turns out, doing the right thing doesn't just cost. It pays in peace, in community, in a laughter of children on a summer morning. Because when you refuse to surrender to bullies, you don't just win a house. You win a home.